It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. She is astrologer, author, and artist Cat Rose Neligan. Cat incorporates astrology into her work, coaching small business owners, helping artists, writers, musicians, and all kinds of creatives to better understand themselves, to identify their calling, and to share their work with the world. She describes herself as a creative introvert dedicated to helping others find their true calling. She was based in Brighton. I think she may have moved recently, but she's not at home tonight anyway. But based in Brighton, she offers regular YouTube astrological updates and has a thriving astrology practice. You can find her website at catroseastrology.com. So Cat has spent many years of study on the concept of the personal diamond, who it is, what it does, and how to live our lives in alignment with it. And in this talk, Cat will take us on an adventure to discover our own personal diamond using approaches grounded in ancient astrological theories and practice, leaving no doubt there is indeed a guiding force in our lives that we can get to know intimately what and who that is. So, Cat, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's so much nicer having somebody else introduce you than trying to do it yourself. So I appreciate that. So yeah, this talk, Discovering Your Personal Diamond, I'm just going to dive straight in. And if people want to, just a quick question, will people be able to leave questions throughout in the chat as they think of them, or do we just do that all at the end?
We can do it at the end. If would you like to answer them as they come up, or later on?
I might check in a couple of times, like when we get to the technical stuff, just to make sure that people are getting.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right, so I'll skip my intro slide since that was so nice. And let's talk about just the word daimon. Well, I'm going to spend the whole first 20 minutes of this really talking about what exactly the daimon is, and at least my interpretation of this word daimon or daimon. You can spell it D-A-E-M-O-N. The way I spell it is just a more ancient Greek version of it. Other names for the daimon that you might hear it kind of being likened to is things like spirit, genius, personality, destiny, acorn, divine twin, higher self, holy guardian angel. As you can tell, like a lot of these words, they're quite diverse. They all carry a very different flavor with them. I'm most interested in the personal daimon as an entity that is both separate to us and yet connected to us, that exists between us and God or spirit or whatever your name for the divine is, that guides us towards virtue and yet also has a kind of job to keep us bound to our fate. And here's the bit where it really gets into this, it gets connected to astrology, is that it can also be the thing that can help free us to an extent from our fate. And that's kind of what this talk will be talking about. I'll be getting into stuff like fate and destiny, just a word of warning. I'll do my best at the philosophy side of things. Don't get it confused with the word demon. Unfortunately, whilst the daimon isn't just a perfectly good being, it certainly isn't the same as the idea of the Christian devil or demon. It's thought that that there are different ways of looking at this, but it's thought that when Christians were trying to do away with the older pagan or polytheistic ideas, the daimon became a threat. And so we ended up with the purely good angel on like one shoulder and the purely bad demon on the other. But actually the daimon is much, much more than that. So let's talk a little bit about these roots of the word daimon and this mysterious entity. So I'm going to travel back in time a bit to ancient Alexandria and the beliefs of the Greco-Egyptian culture. And partly this is because that this is a time and place where so much of Western astrology was developed. And at this time, there were also various cults and lots of worship to the powerful Agathos daimon and the counterpart Agatha Tyche or Tyche. I'm not a Greek expert, so I'm never quite sure about how that word Tyche is said. But if you are, let me know. The name basically means good spirit, and this multifaceted god has its origins in the notion of a household god, a god that you would pray to and worship for abundance and good spirits, basically, in your home. So it was associated with life, fertility, abundance, often pictured with a cornucopia. So around the time, in fact, before the time of Socrates, so pre-400 BCE, the meaning of the word daimon was still quite ambiguous. You had this idea of that agathos daimon, this household kind of good luck god, but you also see the word daimon used in a wide variety of contexts. Even the gods would refer to themselves as daimons in the writings of Hesiod. And even some would kind of refer to the daimon almost like an altered state of consciousness that we could be in. It was a state that took hold of us and worked through us. And this is also going to be relevant when we start talking about particularly the 12th house in astrology. It also seemed to describe the quality of our fate, not the fate itself, but the quality it took. So this cheerful looking fellow is of course Socrates, and I have him here because Socrates had arguably one of, not the most famous personal daimons in Western cultural history. With Socrates, the daimon becomes a personal guide, not just this external entity or kind of a vague idea or force, or sometimes a god, sometimes not. The vagaries kind of end with Socrates. So for Socrates, it certainly seemed to be a force for good, or at least one that he thought was a good idea to follow. Famously, it's the reason why he didn't flee the city of Athens when he was sentenced to his death. His daimon or daimonian urged him not to. And that was pretty much par for the course with Socrates' experience. It was always the daimon that was giving him guidance of what not to do rather than what to do. And there's a famous phrase he gets quoted on: to confine the daimonian coerces me, to create it refuses me. So he couldn't just go to his daimon and say, you know, what should I do today? What should I, create today? The daimon was saying, I won't tell you what to do, I'll tell you what not to do. So that's just something to keep in mind too. When you start thinking about your personal daimon, some people's daimons may have that, like a bit more of a Saturnian quality, and you might hear more no's than yeses, but I think we can all relate to that when, our intuition shows up and we get strong kind of no feeling. Sometimes it's a strong yes, but also I just learned that, actually, the time of writing this was quite a while ago. I learned that the word daimon or daimonian refers to the sign of the daimon, or literally the daimonic thing. So not the literal daimon entity, more the omen that the daimon brings. Again, we're thinking about this is a really kind of complex word that just kind of depends on the context that you're using it in and the intention that you have with it. So this is where you get to customize it. You might like to think of your daimon as a kind of Jiminy Cricket character, or you might understand it more like the nature of fate itself, destiny, or an omen that the daimon brings. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. So Plato was the one who wrote down most of what we know about Socrates and further elaborates on the idea of the daimon. And he is arguably the character who has had the most influence on not only my concept of the daimon, my understanding of it, but also on many of the great minds that we'll be looking at in this talk. He places daimons lower in his cosmology than in earlier Greek thought, so further away from gods. We're not seeing Plato conflate daimons and gods anymore. And much closer to our realm, and saw them as being active mediators or bridges between the realm of the fixed stars. So in this, you've probably seen this diagram online or in other talks before, but that's the realm of the fixed stars. We've got the zodiac around the edges, and we've got the spheres of the planets here, the wandering stars. And then we've got the firmament here and Earth. And basically, it's kind of around here that the daimon lives, between the planets and us on Earth. Plato also suggested that we are each born with a unique daimon or guardian who oversaw our experiences, our fate, and who had the duty to hold us to that particular path. And this is the perspective he lays out in the myth of It's the account of a man, who has been, I wish I had an American accent sometimes so I could say because it just sounds clearer, who has been slain on a battlefield and has an experience in the afterlife, only to come back on the funeral pyre several days later, alive to tell his tale. So here is part of his tale. When all the souls had chosen their lives according to their lots, they went before Lachesis, and she sent with each, as the guardian of his life and the fulfiller of his choice, the genius or Daimon that had been chosen. Under her hands and her turning of the spindle, the destiny of the chosen lots is ratified. Then the genius or Daimon again led the soul to the spinning of Atropos to make the web of its destiny irreversible or irresistible. And then without a backward glance, the soul passes beneath the throne of necessity. So in Ur's trip to see behind the scenes of human incarnation, he learns that the life that we're living was chosen by us and that we each have a personal daimon, again, that we chose. And we meet these three sisters of fate, the Moirai, that ratify our fate and make that which is chosen irreversible. So you might be thinking, I don't remember agreeing to any of this. If I would have chosen my life, I sure would have chosen a bigger house and better paying job and all of that. Well, this myth can't tell us exactly why we might have chosen what we chose. In fact, it suggests that we forget this vital part when we come into our material bodies. We forget that we've made any choices. But the daimon remembers. In Plato's myth, the job of our personal daimon is to hold us to that life that we chose, to hold us to the agreement we made, and give us the opportunity to live it out the best we can. So this kind of brings us onto the question of the core conundrum that so many of us face when met with the possibility that the life we're living is, at least to an extent, predetermined. And I think this is something commonly when we start getting interested in astrology, we might be confronted with and have to deal with or grapple with. My first instinct when I was confronted with the possibility of predetermination was to run screaming in the opposite direction. Who wants to learn that our past, our present, and our future can be read by watching planetary bodies, much like we tell the time from looking at clocks, the hands on a clock. And even if I did on some level choose this life, possibly through the actions in previous incarnations, then what prevents me from choosing something worse next time? It is a stressful thought. Yeah. So here's when things get a little bit more nuanced. While the ancients acknowledged the power of the fates, so those three sisters, the Moirai, or predetermination, they also made space for pronoia. So pronoia, or providence, or forethought in the kind of Greek interpretation, or foreknowing is actually the Roman interpretation. This is the kind of, what's it called, like a loophole, I suppose, to our fate. The astrologer Robert Schmidt described pronoia as the thought that exists before we do it, the intention that we have. It can also be thought of as the choice we have to get to know our fate, and by knowing our fate, be granted a kind of wiggle room or free will. And for many ancient astrologers, and for astrologers today, this knowing our fate, understanding what's written in the stars, offers a clear path to living a more virtuous life. We know pain is inevitable. Suffering, however, is optional. But how optional? It doesn't feel optional when I stub my toe or when the cat scratches me. I feel pain. But what if knowing what pains might befall us is the key to making our suffering optional, or the nature of those pains that we have? If I know I'm going to get into a confrontation with somebody on Tuesday, then am I going to choose to be kinder to myself? Am I going to choose to avoid people that day? Or am I going to be, kinder to my adversary? Because I've already seen in the movement of the heavens, how my petty misfortunes might be reflected. At least maybe I can prepare myself emotionally. Vettius Valens and Claudius Ptolemy are 2nd century astrologers and examples of such minds who appear to have thought along these lines. They seem to believe that knowing our fate helps us to bear it, and in doing so almost changes it. Choosing how you respond to a situation can allow you to change it. Here's a quote from Valens. I myself, having learned from foreknowledge, claim such a foundational chart as my lot, and that within this parameter, it is not possible to become something different. And I became a lover neither of authority, rule, or any other kind of showy reputation, or abundance of wealth, or a slave of desire, and an impious flatterer of both gods and men, able to obtain what the Daimonian did not wish to provide. In other words, I think he's basically saying, once I understood my chart, I understood my my limits, what I could expect in this life. I stopped chasing these things. I stopped chasing what the Daimonian, what the Daimon or the omen of the Daimon didn't wish to provide. So Valens is I'll move on. An example might be, sorry, this is a terrible image, finding yourself in a dull office job licking envelopes. No offense to envelope lickers out there, but let's say you don't have a choice in your role as envelope licker, but you do have a choice in how you meet that fate. You decide to become the best envelope licker there ever was. You might be promoted, you might not, but the pride that you choose to take in that role is what changes your experience of it and potentially the quality of the subsequent events. These choices, as small as they can seem, are what save us from making a hell out of our own lives, or more of a hell. We may be slaves to the laws of fate, but our daimons through pronoia can help liberate us from these cosmic chains. It's kind of like we get more wiggle room when we use our free will to simply ask, what's going to happen and how can I be a good servant of it? Just as in Valens's analogy. So put another way, knowing what we are working with is how we meet it with fate and destiny, or how we transform fate into destiny. And I'm talking about fate and destiny, and these are quite distinct, at least in my head. And part of that is because of this lovely quote from Alexander Lowen, a psychiatrist, who said, destiny or daimon is related to the word destination. It refers to what we become, whereas fate or fortune describes what one is. Fish are fated to swim as birds are fated to fly, but that is hardly their destiny. The oracle at Delphi did not foretell the destiny of Oedipus, which was to vanish from the earth and find an abode with the gods. He prophesied his fate, which was that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So I think this is a really important distinction, and it becomes even more important when we get into Daimon and how it relates to astrology, and also how fortune shows up, or fate relates to astrology. And in fact, I've read in an old version of Plato, an old copy of Plato's Republic, which is where the myth of is, it's book 10, I believe, in which the word daimon is totally swapped out for the word destiny. And when I saw that, I mean, this was halfway through my research, and I was like, oh my God, daimon is destiny. Like, I knew it. And it was interesting that author chose to, translate daimon as destiny then. So anyway, according to Plato's myth of the daimon remembers what we're here to do, to be, to experience, and apparently wants us to remember that as well. Our destiny is quite literally calling us. It's calling us to open our eyes to the fate that confronts us and meet it with our conscious intentions. It's in both our best interests, both my best interest and my daimon's best interest, to know what we agreed to. And hence, divinatory practices are so important to those who accept this myth as reality, as analogous as reality. In fact, the daimon has been conceived of as the guiding force that enables the practitioner of astrology or tarot, anything else divinatory, to receive divine guidance when interpreting their divination tool, an astrological chart. And Charles Carter is quoted by Geoffrey Cornelius in the book The Moment of Astrology, making the point, any divinatory method may in fact rely on the guidance of the daimon. So as astrologers, a lot of us are directly working with the daimon, I believe. That was that slide. So discussing the natal horoscope, Marsilio Ficino believes that we can come to this incarnate life on Earth with some kind of meaningful work or way of life, and the cosmos, or the fates perhaps, favor us to the extent that we follow its calling, this calling. That assuredly is the thing for which the heavens and the Lord of your horoscope gave birth to, he said. Therefore, they will promote your undertakings and favour your life to the extent that you follow the auspices of your geniture, your birth chart, especially if that Platonic doctrine is true, with which all antiquity agrees, that every person has at birth one certain daimon, the guardian of his life, assigned by his own personal star, which helps him to that very task to which the celestial summoned him when he was born. So this is just really, really rich with stuff, because assigned by his own personal star. This is part of a technique in astrology, which I won't have time to get into today, but this idea that you can locate a very, very strong planet in your chart, which is the planet that kind of assigned you your daimon, so that maybe the nature of your daimon is somewhat of the nature of that planetary star. Yeah. We will talk about some techniques, so I will get there. So let's think about how this could link into astrology and what astrology can tell us about the daimon. Following these assumptions, could it be that our personal daimon is supportive of our use of divinatory methods? And if that means it can, we can better understand our fate and what we're meant to be doing. If this is the case, could it be that this spirit guide has also left us clues in our birth charts, clues to the path it wants us to take, clues to how we might react to fated events? And after all, we began this journey together with our personal daimons when we chose this particular course in life. It could be in the daimon's best interest to be in a relationship with us. And part of being in a relationship with anyone or anything is knowing about one another. So in this image, we see Agathos Daimon on the right and Agatha TK on the left, who were these household spirits related to abundance and goodness. And they often came as a pair. Daimon, we know, relates to destiny, our will, our intentionality, and all good things that come from that. TK was more closely associated with fortune, the kinds of things that just happen for better or for worse without our intentions. Fortune or fate. So if you remember that Alexander Lowen quote about fish and birds and Oedipus, fate or fortune is that what we are versus destiny or daimon as what we will become. Through my research, I found our daimons have left clues even in the foundational principles of astrology itself. You can find evidence of the daimon as well as the concept of fate in the two principal luminaries or planets that we study in astrology, the sun and the moon. Most of us are familiar with our sun sign or our star sign, and this is the sign of the zodiac that the sun was in at the moment we were born. I think you all know that. Similarly, we have a moon sign, the sign that the moon was in when we were born. These two places alone can tell us a great deal about the life that we're living and form a foundation for us to learn about the nature of our fate and destiny. So the sun, this is a really nice quote from Charles Ober in his book, The Classical Seven Planets. The sun is tied to perception and intellect. The sun is light, and light is what you see by. Light is also connected to understanding and thinking, the way we speak of shedding light on something. So, when we understand something, or, we might say something like, oh, I see. And that's all related to this idea of seeing by the light of the sun. Or when we're confused or unaware of something, we often say, I'm in the dark. In other words, we lack the light of the sun to illuminate a situation. For this reason, the sun is also associated with our intentionality, which is also what the daimon assists with or is associated with. The daimon guides, it illuminates our path, and assists in us choosing virtue over our lower passions. And actually, one more thing. This is really interesting. I can't help myself. The sun also represents action. It represented action in the ancient world, the creation or the beginning of things. The sun rises every day, and we rise with the sun, usually. The break of dawn is the beginning of our day and the beginning of action. And naturally, this intentional action is related to the daimon as a driving force, a choice that we make to act on something in our lives. Okay. The moon is more associated with the fate or fortune that we're dealt. So Obert says, Moon is associated with the physical life and the body. The moon is also our mortality, life within the changeable world, where everything is born, grows, fades, and dies, like the moon's phases. Being physical, moon relates to possessions, physical things we own. This is related to the fact that fortune waxes and wanes like the moon. So naturally, we have that kind of inevitability, that the kind of choiceless nature of nature itself that we see reflected in the moon. The ups and downs of life are reflected in the moon's cycles. Without the moon, however, so that always doesn't sound so fun, but without the moon, the action of the sun wouldn't really have any matter to channel. It wouldn't have form on Earth. Similarly, without fate, without the kind of stuff that we're just born with, that we have to just deal with in life, the Daimon wouldn't really have anything to work through. It wouldn't have anything to form, to act with or guide. You know, without us physically incarnating into this life, our Daimons wouldn't have anything to guide. So just a recap of some of the attributes, and you can kind of think of these, you know, if you already know about the sun, you know about the moon, then you know about Daimon or spirit or destiny, and you know about fortune or TK. And I won't go through all of these, but if you want the slides, I'm always happy to give those. So let's move on to the houses, because this is another place in astrology that we see the relationship between Daimon and fate. And this is in the naming of the houses in astrology. So traditionally, and all the houses have these kind of ancient names. I don't think they're so commonly used these days, but they're out there, they're real. So the 11th house is traditionally known as the house of good spirit or good daimon, and the 12th was known as the house of bad daimon or bad spirit. Opposite, we've got the 5th house of good fortune and the 6th house of bad fortune. So we see daimon and TK even showing up in the houses and the meanings of the houses. I've got the planets here because the different planets were thought to take their joys, or, you know, kind of like how different planets take their homes or their domiciles in different zodiac signs. They also have a favorite house to be in. And Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th, a good bringer. Saturn, the big malefic, is taking its joy in the 12th. Mars is taking its joy in the 6th, and Venus in the 5th. So here's a quite helpful quote to understand the difference between fate or fortune versus the destiny of Daimon, from Robert Schmidt. In the astrological context, the fortune-like fate of the 5th and 6th houses has a more impersonal character, kind of like when you go downtown to buy something and you accidentally meet up with somebody who pays money he is owed you. That's the 5th house, good fortune. Or have a car accident that gives you whiplash, 6th house fortune or fate. This kind of fate is what accompanies your own deliberate activity, but was not something that you yourself personally intended. By contrast, the spirit-like fate, or the daimon-like fate, wears a more personal face, as when fate seems to embody itself in a benefactor or a good angel, the 11th house fate, or in an enemy who despoils you like an evil demon, 12th house fate. This kind of fate can be a godsend and the fulfillment of your expectations, or else the material manifestation of your worst fears. But again, one thing I'd kind of like stress there is it has a bit more of your intentionality is more involved with the 11th and the 12th. So with the 11th house, we're thinking about the people and experiences that lift us up, that help us out. It's the friend who puts in a good word for us and gets us the job. It's the community who inspires you to develop a new skill or take on a more public-facing role. It's a house of hopes, of ambitions, of dreams. It's what we aspire to, and this is partly because planets in the 11th are thought to kind of be lifting up to the 10th place. But this is, again, another whole story to get into. The 12th house more speaks to obscurity, to challenges, periods of isolation and exile. In other words, it's everything that carries us away from the world, or the public world. It was associated with shipwreck, literally and metaphorically. I think we can all admit here that there are times in our lives where we feel like we're being carried off course or isolated or taken away from ourselves. And I think we survived 2020, 2021. These were very much 12th house years for so many of us. Also, even if something feels difficult, it doesn't mean we're getting carried away from the path that the Daimon is here to lead us on. And this is something that I like to stress with the 12th house. I've seen many charts, famous and infamous people, and as well as my clients, that the 12th house experiences, though difficult, subjectively difficult, are still part of the life that we chose. They're still part of our destiny and leading us on to the path. It also does not mean that people with planets in the bad houses, the 6th and the 12th, have a more difficult life than others, or that people with planets in the good houses have an easy ride. We know that it's much more complicated than that. But these houses can speak to an array of experiences and encounters that ultimately work together to tell a rich story of the dance of fate and destiny in our lives. I've got a couple of chart examples to show you how this works out. So I've got James Dean's chart here, Rebel Without Cause and all that. He has had the sun in the 11th house in Aquarius in its exile, and Saturn ruling the 11th house in its domicile in Capricorn. However, that's not the whole story. So yes, it's true that this kind of rebellious sun, James Dean was famous for the film Rebel Without a Cause. So it's got that 11th house sun being almost championed by Saturn in the 10th house of fame. He's also just kind of associated with this outsider personality, someone who was rejected or who rejects society. So in a way, his outsider nature did benefit him. However, the sun is in its school, and to make matters worse, it's loosely, but it's still opposing this Mars in the 5th, the house of good fortune. It's the house representing hobbies and sports. And because this is a day chart, Mars is going to show up a little bit more difficult, and there will be more to this story. But one thing to note is that he did die in a car accident, which is quite a Mars in the 5th house. One way of interpreting that fate. So that's kind of like when good houses go bad. When you get a malefic in the 5th house, it's like bad things that come from good, fun activities, let's say. Joni Mitchell, so she had Saturn and Mars, so both the malefics are in the 12th house. Okay, so at age 10, she caught polio, became bedbound, and she wasn't sure if she was people weren't sure she was going to survive. She was isolated from the world. That was an illness. So that's a 12th house kind of piece of karma, understandable. But here's the thing, as a result of that, she developed an unusual guitar tuning because of how the illness weakened her. And she's one of these rare cases of a woman who makes it to the list of the greatest guitarists of all time. Arguably, the polio is what has not caused, but is inextricably linked to the fate of Joni becoming this remarkable musician that sets her apart from so many others. So do you see how something's difficult here, but there is a connection to the 5th house, and that's because you see that Mars is in Gemini, Mercury is in Scorpio, Mars' sign in the 5th house. So there's a relationship between her creativity and this 12th house period of illness. Here's another example in her life. So in 1965, she gave birth to a baby girl. Unable to provide for the baby, she had to place her daughter up for adoption. This experience remained private for most of Mitchell's career. All right, so we have the 5th house of children, this mutual reception with the 12th house planet Mars in a place of isolation and separation. Ultimately, Mitchell and her daughter did meet in 1997 and reunite. And Mitchell has said since that before her daughter's birth, she'd actually been losing her interest in songwriting, and now identified her daughter's birth and her inability to take care of her as the moment when her songwriting inspiration had truly begun. So again, it's a difficult separation, but it was what prompted this kind of real songwriting inspiration, this ability to really write in a very personal, beautiful way that inspired her. So love that mutual reception. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with the personal daimon? Well, where I'm currently standing is our personal daimon is a mixture of good and bad, just like us. It's subject to passions, just like us. It can lead us away from towards our passions, and it can also lead us towards virtue. And who's to say which is which? For that reason, I believe that both the 11th and the 12th house concern our personal daimon, the good and the bad. And the choice we have is the same as, when looking at any birth chart and the events that befall us. We choose how to respond, and it does matter. We're also not immune to these experiences. Everyone has an 11th house and a 12th house. Just because you don't have planets in those places, it doesn't mean you're immune. We'll all have transits to those places, in other words. And there are ways to make a subjectively bad 12th house experience much worse by how we respond to it, and ways to make it less bad, maybe even beneficial, especially on a soul level, depending on how we respond. Equally, an 11th house experience could be wonderful, but through our actions, we turn it into something evil or self-destructive. I don't know much about Vedic astrology, but I've got a friend who's like always telling me how bad the 11th house is in Vedic astrology. I'm curious to know more about that. For this reason, I don't think that the places describe the nature of the daimon itself, more the events, circumstances, and people that we meet that enable us to interact with the daimon or destiny through the choices and the kind of fate they represent. But I encourage you to reflect on this and play with these ideas yourself. Okay, now I'm going to have a check-in. I haven't seen anything in the chat, so hopefully I'm making some sense. But if there's anything that I just need to clear up before we tackle one more. Okay, I'm going to take silences, keep going. So let's talk about lots. And this is a topic that we could get a lot more in depth in, but it's always worth getting into because it's fascinating. So the lots, or the parts, you might have come across these as parts, not lots, are mathematical points in our charts that are calculated using the positions of the ascendant and different planetary bodies, as well as the lots themselves. So you've probably come across this one here, the lot of fortune or the part of fortune, before. And this one might be a little bit less familiar, partly because the glyph I've used here is based on an old Valens translation of a text. It's an old text. It's kept at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and I went all the way to see it just so I could prove that it existed. But in a lot of software, you see different versions of this lot used. But this is the lot of Daimon, or lot of spirit, or the part of Daimon, or the part of spirit, or the other names for the same thing. Lots are the same thing as parts, or the Arabic parts, which I believe was a mistranslation of the Latin word pars. I feel like it doesn't give the completeness of the Greek term kleros, which means lot. And the term kleros, or lot, originally related to the allotment of property, the casting of lots to distribute property. So that's it's a very daimon word in that way. There's a sort of, even in the myth of lots are literally distributed. So I really, really feel an affinity with the word lot instead of part. So returning to the myth of I was just going to show you, there are different kind of glyphs for the lot of Daimon that you'll see. I like this one, but I don't know of any programs using it. Just returning to the myth of for a second. This quote here, your daimon will not be allotted to you, but you will choose your daimon, and let him who draws the first lot have the first choice, and the life which he chooses shall be his of necessity. Virtue has no master, and as a man honors or dishonors her, he will have more or less of her. The responsibility is with the chooser. God is not responsible. So lots were actually used to order us, to pick an order, so that, but we ultimately did the picking. And fundamentally, what I get from this is there's an interplay here. There's always this interplay with stuff that happens to us and what we choose. So I just wanted to bring that back in. I also wanted to share this one because this is just an interesting way to start thinking about the lots, because they're not planets, they're not even nodes, because even the nodes denote a physical location in the sky. The lots are purely generated from the abstract 2D representation of our charts, the birth charts that you generate or that you draw if you're old school. They are, so Dorian Greenbaum, who has like the Bible on the Daimon, wrote, "They are points which cannot be seen, but only created in the mind. Because they are imaginal, not physical, they fall easily into a noumenal and symbolic space where the astrologer, in his her interpretation, is able, like the daimon, to mediate between the worlds of gods and humans." So I really found that fascinating, and a really like mystical kind of view of the lots. So the lots that we're going to be looking at are calculated using the sun and moon, physical bodies in the sky, and the ascendant, which is a point, but they aren't either. They're mathematically calculated, so they don't relate to either category. They're almost above it in this kind of abstract way, in the same way that some people see like pure maths or like, these or archetypes even as the only real thing. They're realer than like my cup, So could we see the lots as being representative of the fate that we choose in a way that's closer to what was intended? Who knows? These are ideas. So let's talk about the calculation of the lots, because this we do know. The calculation of the lot of fortune and Daimon are based on the luminaries and the degree of the ascendant. So it's important to know your birth time if you want to do this. It swaps, the calculation flips, depending on whether you were born at day or night. Every Hellenistic astrologer swapped the calculation except from Ptolemy, so I ignore Ptolemy and do what the others did. And here we go. So this is calculating the lot of Daimon in a day chart. So if you're born with the sun above the horizon, you have a day chart. So the first thing you'll do is you'll measure the shortest distance from the moon to the sun. So the direction that we're going is important. I'm not going to travel this way around, because that, like, who wants to take the long way around? Part of the calculation means going the shortest distance between your moon and sun. And then you're going to measure the same distance going in the same direction, and that's key, from the ascendant. So that 70 degrees from moon in Sag to sun in Pisces, going to take that same degree length, and there you have a lot of spirit, a lot of Daimon. Okay, in a night chart, we're going to flip that. So instead of going from moon to sun, we're going to go from sun to moon, again, the shortest distance. So we're going clockwise now. And then we're going to take that same distance and project it from the ascendant, and we're going to find a lot of Daimon there. Interestingly, if you want to calculate the lot of fortune, you will reverse it again. So the lot of fortune will be found from going the opposite direction. So in a day chart, we're going from sun to moon. And in a night chart, we're going from moon to sun to find a lot of fortune. What you'll be left with, and this is how you know you've done it right, is that your lot of spirit and lot of fortune will be symmetrical from each other. If you were to draw a line, where's my drawing tools? I don't think I have any, but if you imagine a line from the ascendant to the descendant, the lot of Daimon and lot of fortune will always be at either side of that. Even if you have a new moon or a full moon, if you have a new moon in your chart, you'll find that the lots are very close on either side of the ascendant. And if you have a full moon in your chart, they'll be very close either side of your descendant. Okay. Also, if this is confusing, here you go. Go to horoscopes at astroseek/traditional astrology. And when you put your birth data in there, it will generate a chart with your lot of fortune and lot of Daimon already ready. That's just one way of doing it. So, sorry, I've lost my place. So discussing just in terms of like interpreting this. This is a helpful quote from Paulus, who was quoting Olympiodorus, friends of mine, from the Lot of Daimon. He says, "We can get to know the character of the soul, intentional mind and purpose, just as we learn the body and things concerning the body from fortune. The greatest power of divination abides with knowing the character of the soul and instruction about the body. That is to say, how a soul, having come from above, is here a citizen of the cosmos, and how she will encounter the body and things concerning the body, and speaking generally, all the things that are not up to us." So just that first bit, we can get to know the character of the soul, the intentional mind and the purpose. That's actually all he says about the Lot of Daimon. But what I really found quite helpful is, this is all about the nature of fortune. So sometimes when I'm talking about Daimon, I kind of forget about fortune a bit, but this is a really helpful thing. And it's just a way to see that dual nature, not dual, it's almost just an always interlinked nature of Daimon and fortune. So, and another thing that I got from this is a lot of Daimon is basically telling us how we will encounter what we encounter, how we will encounter all the things that are not up to us. That's the Daimon. All the things that are not up to us, that's fortune. Other guidelines for interpreting the lots. So this is kind of like a summary, and it can get a bit, I tend to get quite reductionist with things. It's kind of like a Mercury and Aries thing maybe, but there are lots of things that you can do with the lots and how you can kind of approach the lots. There's a great book on the lots, or the Arabic parts, by Linda Weber, which I recommend, and Charles Ober also has some really great work on it. I'm still playing with it, and the part of the reason I brought it up today wasn't for us all to go away and look at our lots. You can, but it's really just to see how in these foundational doctrines in astrology, you see Daimon and its kind of soulmate fortune. So anyway, the Lot of Fortune represents the body and material experience. It speaks to the real world, physical events that befall us, injury, what we undergo or experience. So not just good fortune, which it seems that a lot of YouTubers, or just astrologers in general, think that the Lot of Fortune indicates where you get rich or something. Well, we've all got the Lot of Fortune in our charts and we're not all rich. So the Lot of Daimon relates to the mind, the soul, character, our action, our rank in society, fame. So, and those are kind of, I mean, I say that, like that's, some of these are very, kind of like the kind of old school phrases. So I'm trying to like update them somehow and make them more relatable. So the conscious choices that we make, as well as our response to those events that befall us. Interestingly, I've seen illnesses being put under the Lot of Daimon and injury under the Lot of Fortune. So, and the reason for that being illnesses were seen in the ancient world as much more kind of like mysterious and more of the nature of spirit than of the physical body. Like an injury is kind of more of a sixth house thing that we encounter, whereas an illness, an invisible, because you can't see illnesses usually unless you have physical symptoms, that's more of a 12th house thing. Mental health being quite a 12th house thing. So I'm putting this slide back in just as a reminder, because this is where we see these archetypes just show up again. You could replace the word the sun with the Lot of Daimon, and you could replace the word the moon with the Lot of Fortune, quite frankly, because all of these words apply, I would say, to both as well. Okay, so what has this all got to do with the Daimon? So we've only looked at 2 lots today, but there are actually many more, like loads more. But Walter Burkert has this idea that the Daimon isn't a specific class of being, but a particular mode of activity. And we actually see this reflected in the 7 Hermetic lots. So these are fortune, daimon, which we've looked at. There's also eros, necessity, courage, victory, and nemesis. And all of these could have and have been called daimons or modes of activity. That's just kind of interesting. So it's almost like saying the gear of the daimon, that is, or the mode of activity that is spirit or intentionality, is represented in a lot of daimon. The mode of activity that is kind of like just the stuff that the fates throw at us is fortune. Kind of more like an archetypal concept of daimon. So wherever these lots are placed for us, they will show how these daimonic modes of activity play out in our lives. It shows us the how, not the what. And I think this is probably one of the more helpful things that I've found, which is the key, is focusing on this mode of activity, the way something happens. And this is very different to how we see the planets. It's really tempting to see the lots as planets, and I have just compared them to the sun and the moon, but it gets a little bit more, there are subtle differences. And because the planets can be a lot more about the what of our fate and destiny, planets, they can represent specific relationships that you encounter, or a person in our lives, or, like things that have actually manifested. The lots just aren't that specific. They are more to do with the how, the mode of activity, than the what. The lots are something else, basically. And Martin Hermes backed this up in a great talk he gave on the Hermetic lots. And when I further probed him about it, he said something I found really helpful, which is the lots are the powers of the planets, not the planets themselves, but their influence, their virtue. So I understand this in that when you are overcome with rage, that is the spirit of Aries or Mars overwhelming you. You've seen in the lot of, is it the lot of Nemesis? I forget which Hermetic lot Mars relates to. Anyway, so you could say this, it's Tolma actually, courage is Mars's lot. So it could be that this urge is daimonic in nature and gets reflected or translated through Mars's lot. Again, it's all about this how and not the what. And so the sun's lot is the lot of Daimon. Okay, I hope I'm not getting everyone really confused now. The interplay of Daimon and fortune, and this is really, really helpful in terms of, telling us the story of the forces that we're influenced by. That's the lot of fortune, and how we respond to what we encounter. That's the lot of Daimon. How fate hits us, fortune. How do we meet our fate with destiny? It's Daimon. And you can use them just to add an extra layer in the birth chart. I'm not saying like we should all do lot astrology now and get obsessed with lots, but it's helpful to add an extra layer into the regular birth chart reading. And they also seem to describe time-based events, which are very useful for timing techniques. I get into more of this in my program on the Daimon, but basically it's transits to the lots are like undeniably powerful in terms of creating great change in our lives. And it's just worth remembering that Greenbaum quote that I read earlier, relating directly to the divinatory origins of astrology, which I don't have. That's annoying. She said, because they are imaginal, not physical, they fall easily into a noumenal and symbolic space where the astrologer, in his interpretation, is able, like the daimon, to mediate between the worlds of gods and humans. So I'm just going to kind of wrap up here. My reason for practicing astrology and studying the stars is to engage in this dance of fate and destiny, of fortune and daimon, and to watch and wonder as I fall in step with the rhythm, or try to fall in step with the rhythm of the events that unfold. Seeing astrology in this light has given me much greater appreciation for this ancient divinatory language, as well as the events of life itself. Your daimon or destiny is what you do with the lot you are given. It's how you meet your fate. Daimon is what you become, not what you are. It can be discovered at any moment, and you will always be continuing to discover it whenever you ask the question, how will I meet my fate today? That's basically everything. I've got a bibliography, and I have a book called Discovering Your Personal Daimon, which is available on my website, catroseastrology.com. And if you want to dive deeper, I've got a 12-week program where we go into 4 different techniques for looking at the daimon in the birth chart.
Yeah, that was brilliant talk. You've packed an awful lot in there in an hour. Thank
All
you
right,
so
okay.
much.
Thank
It's
you
been
for-
a fabulous evening. Really, really interesting stuff. Really,
you.
really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone.